Cover story on NECN.
This should take you back. Remember the Rubik's Cube? It is quite possibly the world's most original puzzle, and it's tricky, at least I think so. But not so for a 14-year-old boy from Newton, Massachusetts, who will compete in a world championship this summer. And if past performance is any indicator here, he may very well win. NECN's Julia Bovey has tonight's cover story.
Andy Camann's room looks pretty typical for a 14-year-old boy. There's his track ribbon, his baseball and soccer trophies. But when he sits here on his baseball logo bedspread, what Andy does is anything but typical. When it comes to solving Rubik's Cube, Andy just may be the fastest kid in the world. And he's about to compete to find out.
This August 23rd and 24th is the Rubik's Games World Championships in Toronto. It's a competition. You set official records, whoever wins, and you win prize money. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I take Andy's Rubik's Cube, give it several turns to mess it up while he's not looking, and hand it over.
Here you go.
The 5 times Andy solved the cube for me, it took him between 17 and 20 seconds. The current recorded world record is just over 20 seconds.
How does it feel when you're actually like in the zone doing it?
Well, you can't really think whenever you're doing the cube. I don't really know what kind of feeling I have. Like, you're just doing this so fast that you don't really think. You just do it. Your hands are doing all the work.
It all started when Andy was in 6th grade, rooting through the shelf of games in his basement, where his family keeps everything from ping-pong paddles to jigsaw puzzles. There he found a Rubik's Cube and an old book on how to solve it.
Found the book, and that's when I did my first solution. I couldn't actually solve it until I found the book.
Take a look at Andy when he first gets the cube in his hand.
Go ahead and solve.
He examines it.
I wasn't looking at the whole cube at a time. That's impossible to do and solve it that fast. You have to break it down into separate, smaller steps and solve individual cubes at a time, and then build up from the random position to a solved cube.
And then he's off, thinking 4 to 7 moves ahead as his hands turn the cube.
Do you always solve red first?
Yeah, I always have red as the top and orange as the bottom, because as you practice, you get used to it being that way. You get used to the colors and like which is on the bottom and which is on the top and which ones you have as the sides.
Well, like any little kid, he liked to play with Legos, and he would build the most amazing structure with Legos and toys and blocks and all sorts of things like that. But I think most kids do that. But when he first started doing the cube, it was really incredible.
Even Andy's own father, a doctor, can't solve the cube. But he's quick to point out his son isn't an idiot savant.
Do you feel like he still is a well-rounded kid?
Absolutely. He plays games, he plays his drums, he plays with kids, he loves to ride his bike around the neighborhood. He does all the things that any other kid would do.
I let Andy know that I have actually solved the Rubik's Cube twice. Once by breaking it apart and putting it all back together, and once by peeling off the stickers.
People started wondering whether...
This neurologist explains I'm not necessarily stupid just because I can't solve the cube, but Andy Camann's brain is clearly exceptional.
Is he a genius?
Quite obviously, in this regard, he is. I mean, by definition of what we call a genius, who's able to do something that nobody else can do, essentially. In this respect, he is.
Dr. Shah Hushbin explains there are several types of geniuses.
There are multiple intelligences. So when you look at somebody like, Venus Williams, and you say that's a kind of genius.
He says Andy's ability to solve the cube comes not from the left side of the brain, responsible for math, science, and reading, but from the artistic right side of his brain, where music, imagination, and spatial relations reside.
Bravo.
This doesn't have to be just poetry, it doesn't have to be just painting, it doesn't have to be music, but in each one of these there are people who exceed. Now when it comes to motor function, very much like the Rubik's Cube, it requires that these people, very much like chess players, think ahead. And they imagine in such a way that average people not only have a hard time to do, but sometimes can't even do it.
That's what's so fascinating about Andy Camann. Not only can he do something most of us can't, he can do it very, very well. August 24th, we'll let you know if he's the best in the world. Julia Bovey, NECN, Newton, Massachusetts.
Going home to get my Rubik's Cube and